Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hi everyone and welcome back to the very latest Fly Culture podcast. Since the last one I put out, things have changed a little bit. It's great to be back fishing again. I've mainly been fishing alone, but I've had a couple of moments where I've spent some time in a safe distance, obviously in the company of good friends as well. The fishing where I am at home in Devon has been really good. It's been a really interesting starting that season a little bit later. So instead of trawling the bottom with nymphs to try and find fish, it's been really good fun to see rising fish and to target rising fish. I don't know if you're the same as me, but one of the things I have noticed is that the hatches have been really, really fantastic. And I can't remember changing my fly so many times on a fish I think's feeding on mayflies, or it might be caddis, or it might be midges, or it might be medium olives or lighter olives. So that's been really, really interesting. But I think it shows how much this means to us, not just myself, but probably if you're listening to this as well, that what fishing means to us. So welcome to the very first non-COVID recorded podcast. This one's going to be a little bit different. I thought that having been putting these out weekly, that instead of having a standard sort of interview, I'm pleased to have my good friend Nick Hart back again. And the reason for that is that I really enjoy talking to him, but we've also, at the start of some of these podcasts and at the end, I sometimes say, send me some questions if you're interested. And I've actually been sent some, which has been great. So that's given me an indication people have listened to it. And you know, there are people listening to the Fly Culture podcast. So I'm really, really pleased about that. So I thought it would be really interesting to answer some of these questions. There's only half a dozen of these ones. And then being somebody who doesn't do a whole lot of stillwater angling, and I'm probably talking small stillwater to reservoir, verging towards reservoir, we'll go on to that. But I'm really pleased to bring Nick Hart back. So Nick, how's it going?
It's going very well. Thanks very much, Pete. Yeah, no, really, really good to catch up with you, actually. Obviously, a really weird time. I know just off mic, we were having a bit of a discussion. Very strange time, but it's been a good chance to sort of connect with the kids a lot. As you know, I'm away in London a good deal. So, yeah, catching up with them, getting some much needed stuff done around the house. And I've yet to get out on the water. But I'm kind of looking forward to trying to do that. I'm saving that up for something really special, because as you know, I was in New Zealand earlier in the year, and I want to do something that's measurable. And that for me is going to probably be on a river somewhere. So when I get a chance to be out there, but yeah, good, really good. Thanks. I hope you are.
Cool. And it's interesting you mentioned that. I know we're going to try and hook up at some stage as well. So we'll see if we can get out on the river as well. And you touched on New Zealand, and I think it would be rude not to talk about that a little bit. And it was quite a hairy one for you, because you were out there just as the pandemic broke, really, weren't you? And we were probably on the cusp of getting into lockdown, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, myself and a pal, you know, we were incredibly lucky. He's actually over in New Zealand, you know, James very well. But I left on the 17th of February and returned on the 6th of March, got back into the UK. So we were right in there just before it all really kicked off. I mean, I had to go through Singapore, and they were there measuring people's temperatures. When we actually finally got back to the UK, there were some people that came on and were sort of, you know, saying, no, you've got to stay on board. And by the time I got off the plane, it became pretty obvious that things had moved along somewhat. You know, I think it was one of those things we all thought it's not going to happen to us, sort of thing, you know. And yeah, so I was just unbelievably lucky, really. And I feel very sorry for those people that you know should have been doing those sorts of things. That unfortunately it's been cut short. I was actually supposed to be out in Mexico last month, for example, and of course all of that that was with a group of our people from Farlow's, and yeah, no, it's all come to a shuddering halt.
And it makes you realise how much it means to us as there has been a very obviously somber and important background that we were focusing on, but the not being able to fish part of it in our little community, in our little world, had it was kind of interesting to see how we coped with it in different ways, wasn't it? Not being able to say, right, I'm going to go out for an hour or two. I'm going to, and as a result of being able to fish now, it makes it that much more special. And like you say, you're trying to save it for that special moment to get your season underway.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I can ever remember in my life which was kind of a cool thing, because obviously, we had all the bad weather with the grayling, didn't we? So I didn't really get any grayling fishing done, not sort of early in 2020 either. And so I sort of thought to myself, well, I'm going out to New Zealand. Like I say, really fortunate to get the opportunity with all this stuff going on now. And the first fish I caught this year was not in the UK. First time I've ever done that, and I kind of quite like that sort of thing in fishing. So that was very cool. And then having come back, it's been a case of I'm kind of waiting for the right moment, really. But a lot of people, I think, have perhaps suddenly realised, some of this fishing, it's very easy to take it for granted. Like you say, just pop out for a couple of hours here and a half-day session there, or whatever it might be. And when people had that taken away, then it was. I think it's been very difficult. Certainly, judging by the amount of people that are out there fishing now, which is also brilliant to see. So maybe there's going to be some good to have come from this sort of terrible time, and hopefully people are reconnecting with their fishing a bit.
Yeah, that'd be great to see, and I hope they're able to support their still water fisheries, their clubs, the tackle industry, everything else, as well as on a wider basis as well, isn't it? It's going to be a bumpy ride, I guess, ahead, and I hope that we are able to get out there and help just a little bit as well in our own small little way.
I think you touch on something really important. We've obviously fished lots of rivers and so forth over all those years, and I know that that's your real thing, that you love to do. I obviously really like my reservoirs as well, and small still waters and so forth, but particularly reservoirs. And the trouble is, though, they don't have wild fish. A lot of these places, they're obviously being stocked, and they are a business. They do have to pay staff, and they've got to look after, all the banks, obviously, and the access and the safety and the insurances and everything that goes on. And they literally need the support. As you know, I've run a small still water. It's a very difficult, very tiring, huge long hours, and you don't really make a lot out of it. It's as I've always been within fishing. It's why I got into it. I like seeing people smile and really enjoy fishing. And so having a small water when it was all working, and everybody was happy, that was great. But obviously, the flip side of that is being nipple deep in water, ripping weed out and all of those sorts of things. But definitely, if these places aren't supported, then they inevitably, unfortunately, they will slowly but surely decline and disappear. And with that goes, another opportunity for people to go fishing.
And it's interesting, I was going to come on to this a little bit later, as ever I go off on a tangent, but the success story in your neck of the woods and almost mine is Whimperball, really, isn't it? And how that's transformed as a fishery under new stewardship. And I'm seeing, as somebody who doesn't really do a great deal of still water fishing, people raving about the fishing there. And I guess that's, it intimately. And it must be fascinating for you to see how that seems to be a hot venue at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we know that in the past it's had a few issues, and I think actually it started to turn around at one point when Danny Ford came in. He was a really good ranger, and he was doing everything. But the one key thing, obviously, with reservoirs, small still waters, is they have to be stocked. It's not like Scottish lochs and so forth where these fish are wild. They have to be stocked. And what Mark Underhill, who's now taken it on along with his wife Trudy, has managed to do is take his fantastic fish that he produces, and he does produce really high quality fish, and he's stocking enough of them as well to keep people really happy. He's got catch and release there. He's got some good policies. His pricing's pretty good as well. He's just done what really every fishery needs to do, which is put the stock in. But then, of course, you do have to have the support. You've got to have people on those boats. You've got to have people on the banks. They've got to be buying permits. And if they keep doing that and they do it in large enough numbers, then it will keep on going like that. But at the end of the day, it is a business for him. But I think his experience, from being a top quality fish farmer is helping that venue. No doubt, because anglers do want good quality fish. It is brilliant, and of course, it's not just the fish. You and I fish there. It's a spectacular place, especially if you go down the arms and stuff. And not just stick to the normal areas. And perhaps head to the Umpton Arm or go for the long walk and bank fish the Calmore area or whatever. It's a special place. You can kind of lose yourself there a bit. I'm not a fan of walking, as you know, other than to go fishing. But when I did used to take my old black lab, sadly gone now for a long walk, it was Wimbleball that we used to go to. And in fact, actually, we've still got his ashes here, which we're going to take up and scatter there because it's it's an important place for me for fishing, but also equally it's a good place to remember the old boy spending most of his time swimming around it, which I know he wasn't supposed to be doing, by the way, but as you know, he wouldn't stay out the water.
Yeah, nice. And it may be that when we come onto the Stillwater section of it, that we use that as a template as a fishery, and then write about the size and how you'd go about approaching it and stuff. So we may keep that in mind. But let's go back. I was thrilled, as I said at the beginning in the introduction, that people have contacted and sent me some questions. So I thought it would be fun for us to try and answer those, and as well as your Stillwater expertise, I thought there is some Stillwater stuff on here, but also some river stuff as well. So I thought perhaps if I ran through these questions, and our listeners might find these interesting as well, we can perhaps add some value in a different way as well. So I'm going to read the first one out. It's from Andrew. It doesn't say where from, but it says, "Hi Pete, loving the magazine and podcast. Keep up the good work." Many thanks, Andrew. Here's a quick question that I'd love to know your thoughts on. I fish a small stream and have recently bought a new rod and wondered if I should go up a line weight to load it quickly at the short distances I'm fishing. Many thanks, Andrew. Now, do you want this first one, Bud, or?
Oh, we could both go. Well, what do you think? You have I know my thoughts straight away on it, but
Mine is no now. Nick's nodding
vigorously.
It's always one of those very nervous ones. My answer is no to that because of fly line development now as well, so that we can buy fly lines that are designed for a particular application. So we can have a line. I'll use the Rio Creek, for example, or the Barrier Small Stream, that will load a rod really quickly. We can use it up close, minimal false casting. If you'd have asked that question 6, 7, 8 years ago, I'd have said definitely. And I remember, I'm sure you have as well, Nick, doing demonstrations where you'd say go up a line weight. But my answer to that is no right now. What would you like to add to that, Bud?
I totally agree. I mean, I remember probably the rods that I used most of all before I started to get into the 9-footers was the 8-foot for a 4 SLT, and also the grey Streamflex as well. But the original ones from way back when. And frequently I'd get people when I was guiding them, they'd actually it'd be a 4-weight, but they'd have a 5-weight line on it, because obviously so much of the stuff we were doing is such short range, and so therefore they've just got that little bit more weight, that little bit more load on the rod. But now, like you say, a hell of a lot of lines are a half size, sort of heavier, and obviously the various tapers. I'm a massive fan of that Rio Creek myself. I think I chuck it on my dart, and it's just like it's absolute heaven. I love the thing, So yeah, I think now definitely the lines are out there. What I would say is that it actually is really worthwhile going somewhere if you possibly can and trying different lines. When you say sort of putting lines up rods, because not every line is going to suit every single rod.
Yeah, and I think we may have even touched on that before in the tackle talk that we did, and having a line, getting that line to work the rod. And it's amazing. I have a certain default line that I use when I first try a rod, but then if that doesn't feel right, I might try some others. And that's been one of the things with the lockdown, interestingly, that I've been doing a lot of casting and refined, even with my bamboo rods, spending time saying, right, what line can I get the most out of with that? And I think you hit the nail on the head with the tapers as well. And the way, the tapers do the job for us. And I know, there are fans of double taper, but the question, I'm just rereading it back actually, was a small stream. So it doesn't matter so much about the back taper. It's my ability to load that rod quickly, but also so that it doesn't land like a pile of spanners on the water. And I think certainly with the Creek line, that's what they've done really, really well as well. So the answer to that is no. It is always, and I'll always say it, I'd rather spend more on the fly line and take some of that from the overall cost of the rod if I needed to do that, because I think the fly line really is super important and is really worth spending time to make sure that you get it right. And even someone who has worked in it a long time, I'm still always fine tuning to make sure that I get the fly line and rod combinations exactly where I want them to be.
I got a quick story on that, really quick one. A client of mine, really quite expensive bamboo rod that he'd commissioned and had it built and everything, and he turned up with this thing and was super proud of it. He came with a pal of his as well, actually, and I remember we were on the River Mole one day with this thing, and I'd watched him a bit through the day, and you'll know yourself, Pete, when you watch somebody and you think, because he's a pretty reasonable caster, and I thought, you're struggling, it's just not working for you, is it? This rod. And so I had a chat because obviously, he spent a lot of money on this, and I said, give us a rod, let's have a little go with it. And it was just horrendous. I mean, absolutely terrible. I was like, how on earth have you managed to fish with this for as long as you have, today? And I always, like yourself, again, would keep spare lines in my pack and stuff, just in case we had a break of anything or whatever. So I said, just hang about, go and grab this line, chucked it on the rod. You've never seen a smile like it. It was just like, I never forget that, this really expensive rod he'd spent all this money on and had coveted and had to wait, it was on a waiting list for this rod. And then finally it arrives, and I could just see he was, and it was very funny actually, because chatting with him, he was like, I was determined to make it work. And, I just, it was that sort of thing. It's a bit like when, I don't know, you've bought a pair of shoes or a car or something just because of the color or whatever. And then you actually find that they don't fit very well, or the car's not very good. And you still just kind of just grit your teeth, really. Put that line on, and it was a thing. So yeah, it's so important to get the right line on there. Nice question. I like that one.
I had one. Yes, thank you, Andrew. I had one when I worked for you, actually, and you may or may not remember it, that I was teaching somebody and he just couldn't get the rod to load. And I said to him, can I have a quick go? And I had a quick go, and I thought, Pete, you've lost the magic. It's gone. I couldn't make it work. And I said to him, have you cut any of this fly line back? He said, only a little bit. And I said, what do you mean by a little bit? And he said, 15 feet. So there was barely any hair. So he was trying to cast running line, basically. So that's one of those you never forget. And of course, having the weight forward line on the wrong way round as well. I've had one of those again when I was working for you.
You've taken the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, have you had that? I've had that on a couple of occasions. I always remember a guy walking around the fishery, and as I walked around, I was watching him thinking, your technique looks really good. Like, he cast really nicely and he was actually forming a beautiful loop, but you could see it was just going out and going, just landing in a heap. And having got round to him, did the old give us a go then, and line on back to front. So turned it round for him. He's like, I can't believe this. Are you sure? And I'm like, absolutely. And I didn't even cast it. I said, here, have a go with that now. So I think probably all that practice casting just the running line had done him a lot of good, because by the time I turned him, he was like out to the back end before he knew it. It was brilliant.
So our second question is from Simon, and he's in Wiltshire. Pete, I fish a variety of rivers and wondered what you would consider a good all-round rod length. Really enjoy the podcasts. Thanks again, Simon. Over to you, bub. What do you think for rod length?
Depends a little bit what you're doing, but I have to say that these days, in a huge amount of situations, I'm using a 9 foot for a 4 weight. That's a real go-to rod, and it's the rod that I guided with a lot. Various reasons for that. Probably the very first one actually is just going to be that obviously with the advent and the popularity of nymphing, I like the length of it a great deal. That made it sort of a little bit more versatile, but also doing actually not just a nymphing. We do quite a lot of this sort of short line dry fly fishing, especially in the rough water of somewhere like the River Lynn. And I never really personally got into the Tenkara thing, but definitely found that, if you had that extra foot, 8'4" is the common one, isn't it? That so many people will buy for a river. And that was me certainly for a long time. And then, I went up that extra foot just simply because control of dry flies, control of nymphs. And I actually just quite like it in the hand as well, just like a 9 foot rod. That said, I go right down to, I've got 7.5 foot 3 weight rods, like the Dart and so forth as well. So it's going to depend a little bit where you are. That's for sure. So there are rivers that I fish that no doubt, if you go in there with a 9 footer, it's going to be trickier, because you're going to end up with a tip stuck in the trees and wrapped around branches and all the rest of it. So a little bit to do with where you're fishing, but I'm fishing the moors a lot, and even the Lynn's got quite a lot of room, and actually I'm struggling to think of many rivers around here where you have to have a toothpick to fish them.
I'm with you on that, actually. I'm with you. I've never owned anything, I don't think, under 7 feet that I can recall.
I never have.
Yeah. And my humble advice would be, exactly, really, as Nick's saying, for small. It doesn't say where you fish, Simon. Actually, for small streams and the small overgrown tree-lined streams of the West Country and the lowland rivers, 7.5 to 8 foot in a 4 weight, slightly bigger, 8.5 to 9, and then if there is enough room, that longer rod, I'll go up to a 10 foot as well. Line weight, I like a lighter line now, and I'm fishing 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. The 1s and 2s are really for dry fly fishing. I don't worry about their ability to subdue fish. I can do that with them. And then if I'm going to fish, and I haven't really done much at all this year, I've done zero actually thinking about it. If I'm going to fish a dry dropper or a duo or whatever you want to call it, with a dry and a nymph, those 3 and 4 weights have a little bit more mass in the fly line to propel that heavier payload out. But as Nick's saying, longer gives you, that you can get away with, I think gives you a little bit more flexibility and allows you to cover that water, get that elusive drag-free drift, and makes life a little bit easier. But my thing is more lighter lines. I like to fish the lighter lines. I don't think they're high day and holiday rods. With the lines that we have that we can use, the wind's not going to blow them away, and I find them perfectly usable. So I'm fishing 3 weights most of the time, but often on the upper rivers there's no water in the upper rivers of the West Country at the moment. So I've not been fishing them, but there'll be 1s and 2 weights that I'll be fishing there most of the time. But hopefully that answers your question there. Right, a question from Dave. This is an interesting one. I fish a river that the nicest fish are in the hardest to reach spots. What advice would you give to get more success and perhaps even catch a few of the bigger fish that I've seen?
Oh, well, I think you're a specialist in this at the moment. I know you've had a great season on the bigger fish. From, all the decent fish that I had clients catch over the years, and any that I've been lucky enough to get myself, bearing in mind that, as we know, in Devon, 10 to 12 inches would normally be your bigger fish. Anything 12 inches and above is sort of a monster. But ultimately, I would say that the key thing is patience. It really is, and that's not something that I say about fishing a lot, because, you take the River Lynn as an example of a place that I've fished a lot and taken a lot of people to. It's fast water. The fish there don't have a huge amount of time to make a decision about a fly, and you can go up through there pool to pool. You don't need to be greedy, catch one or two here and there, and you can amass quite a lot of fish and have a great day. However, most of those fish that you're going to catch are going to be, average to below average size, and you're talking numbers. The big ones for me are always about time, and all the biggest fish that I've had with people guiding have been to sort of, look for the perhaps harder to get at areas. Not always expect it to be the huge, great rise form. Sometimes it's just a little tiny sip can be these larger fish. And then actually just spend time, really. Sometimes you might make, a cast or two at these fish and, think you've got it right, and they refuse the fly. If they refuse it, then it's a case of that fly is not going to work. You're not going to suddenly, put that fly back in and it's going to take it. You've got something wrong in the presentation there, and I think you'll know pretty quickly most of the time with them. You'll put them down. If you've got it wrong, they'll just stop rising. So I would say get in position. Really, really take your time and only make the cast when you're absolutely sure, and very much try and identify how it's feeding, whether it's taking something that's emerging, whether it's taking the juvenile fly as it's got out of its chuck. And of course, depending on the time of year and time of day, rather, are you there in the evening? Is it a spinner fall? What, is it just sometimes those fish, can really knock you off balance, and those large fish, you'd expect that they'd be eating the largest meal going, and instead it's just sat there nonchalantly sipping little tiny smuts or something, So observation, time, and obviously the stealthiest wading, and treat it like you're going into battle, frankly.
Nice. I'm with you on that it is take your time. Don't cover the fish too much. So if you think, like Nick says, if you feel that you've sussed out what the fish is feeding on, you've covered it once, possibly twice, and nothing has happened, wait for a bit, perhaps think about what you're casting at them. Do you need to change that as well? And also reaching some of those spots, think about the presentation. I often play the cast through in my mind a little bit and think, right, I've got to throw it here. I'm going to have to make a flat side cast very often. And from my guiding days as well, that often when people are making a flat side cast, just at the very end, they'd lift the rod tip up a little bit. And of course, that makes the fly line go up, and then that can end up in the trees as well. So I sort of play, and I'll say to myself, right, keep it flat, keep it all the way through to delivery, and then work from there. Like you said, walking into position, sometimes it's worth, if the fish is rising, there's some little bow ways, wait for a little bit, take some time there, wait for that settle, for the fish to get back into rhythm again, and think about, right, where's my back cast going? And I look at where I'm going to be putting my back cast so that I'm not going to cock it up. The other thing, I guess, in some of those, and you mentioned the hard to reach spots, a cast that we're seeing so many people use, and some of us I know, and Nick included, have been using a long time, his bow and arrow cast. It's just such a phenomenally good cast, and usually in the spots where fish are under a branch, so it tends to be slightly faster watered, not always, because it might sometimes be a back eddy, but I can get relatively close. I can bow and arrow in there. People often ask about how to hold the fly. I hold it upside down and pull over the top of the rod. It's hard. I'm pantomiming it right now. But I know a friend of ours, Jim Williams, he holds just the leader so he doesn't prick himself. And you can also make those casts a little bit longer by pulling a little bit more line through the rod rings and fire it, holding some of the fly line, which will propel the leader that's on the water there as well. So you can make a longer bow and arrow cast should you need to, but very often you don't. I can't think of many situations where I've done it, but that's one worth practicing. So you're pulling off, I don't know, an extra 10 feet of fly line, and then using where the leader joins the fly line perhaps as the part that you would hold instead of the fly, and then shooting that line through. And that can be really effective. And that's a nice little trick and tip, hopefully, that you may find useful as well in some of those hard to reach spots. But I think, as Nick said, really is spend time, observe, see what's happening, play the cast through, and think, right, how can I make it easy? That's what I always think about with cast as well. Where's the easy cast? How do I put myself in position for an easy cast?
I definitely, if I'll add on to that, that I would certainly, wherever I possibly can, pretty much in any fishing situation, is make the shortest cast I possibly can. It's always better to walk closer to the fish and make a shorter cast rather than stand way back and try and make that long cast. And also, where possible, you got to obviously look at your surroundings a little bit and how close you are, how much line you're going to be casting and so forth. But the longer leader you can possibly manage, I always found that being very important. That sometimes actually you might be doing everything right, but if your leader's that bit too short and the fly impact is too heavy, those fish, once they've started to get larger, if we're looking for those bigger fish, they know what the impact of a fly line feels like. I'm certain that, I believe anyway, I'm certain that they can feel that very, very comfortably and know that, hang on, there's trouble here. So if you can use a long leader, then get that fly away from the impact, and you should have a better chance. It's a case of fine tuning everything, I think, really, isn't it, to sum that up?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, this is a better one for you to answer, I think. Dear Pete, I'm thinking of trying a lighter setup for the reservoir I fish in Cornwall. I guess that must be Stydians or possibly Colliford, but I don't know. It doesn't say here. How light would you go from Phil in Bodmin?
God, that's a really good question. It's going to depend on the circumstances a lot, especially the weather. Because the thing is that you could go real nice and light. Let's put it this way: there's no reason at all why you couldn't go out reservoir fishing with as light as a 4-weight. You probably could go lighter. I don't really see any massive point in doing that. Because obviously the lighter you go, if you start getting into the really light lines, and you've got to think about, if you're going to catch and release the fish, how long do you really want to play it for? And there's no doubt that a slightly heavier rod, a little bit more power, is going to get them in. But I would have, and I've done it, I'd have no qualms at all in fishing down to a 4-weight. The situation's probably going to be summertime, flat calms, fishing tiny little dries, nymphs, that kind of thing, where again, a little bit like the river, you want the stealth approach, and of course you will get good sport as well. But yeah, I think you could go down to that. I guess right in the middle of that, a lot of people were using 6 weights. So I would say, if you were looking for somewhere like, say, Colliford, where you're going to fish a lot of floating lines, probably intermediates. You still want to chuck something like a woolly bugger at them, black leech style patterns, but then your dries, your nymphs and all of that, I see no reason why you couldn't target that a great deal with a 10 foot for a 5 weight. I think would be brilliant. And you've also got then quite a nice heavier river rod as well for those times that you need it. But it's something that I keep toying with the idea of doing a lot more myself, really, is, go cut down completely, floating line intermediate. I'm not going to be fishing 5 weights if I've got to chuck big sinkers. And to be honest, if I'm chucking big sinkers, then the chances of me wanting to use that light line approach is probably next to nothing anyway. But yeah, for imitative fishing on a reservoir in reasonable conditions, I wouldn't recommend it in a howling gale. 10 foot for a 5.
Nice. Thank you for that. Right. Thank you, Phil, for that question as well. This is a question from Steve, doesn't say where he is from. Hi, Pete. You mentioned about some questions for the podcast, so here's one. What length leader are you using for river fishing? Do you want to go first?
No, I did the last one. Go on, you go for it on that, because it's...
I vary, and I'm not one of those sort of people who go through things... I'm terrible, really, that whatever I had on, I try and make a leader last for as long as I possibly can. What I do use is a tapered leader, and I will use one of those, and then I will try and make it last as long as I possibly can. So I may be adding bits and pieces to it, but I start with a 9-footer. And that usually goes, I've stopped the X, using the X system myself. People understand it. And I'm from the school where diameters, millimeters, I'm old school, that inches and are where I'm from. So I don't really understand millimeters and stuff like that. So if I say to you 4 pounds, you'll know exactly what I mean. But I usually have a leader, a supple flex leader that is 9 foot long, tapers to 4.7 pound, I think. Then I may add a couple of feet, possibly 3 feet of 4 pound, and then I may add some 3 pound to that. And that's usually, I don't find I need to go a lot lighter than that. I've been fortunate early season that I've been getting in some nice fish, and I've usually stopped at 4 pound. I can control the fish. I was broken the other day actually by one, but generally I've been able to control them with 4 pound. When I've got a mayfly on, it will be 5 pound. But I would say anywhere between 11 and 14 feet, something around that sort of distance. As Nick said, I'm not fishing huge, great rivers. And as Nick said, I'm trying to get that easy cast, get myself into the right position. So I'm not aerializing huge amounts of line. And as a result of that, if I had a 25-foot leader on and a short amount of fly line, I'm going to struggle turning all of that over. So I don't personally I will tweak things a little bit, but I don't. That usually is where it is, somewhere between about 11 and 13, something like that, feet, something of that sort of distance. 3 pound usually for nearly every situation I fish, unless I'm encountering bigger fish. Obviously, I'm going to fish stronger tippet. And just 3-turn water knots. I flirted with the idea. I used to when I was guiding using tippet rings, but if somebody hung it up in the trees and my eyesight is getting worse, threading one of those back on was a bit of a pain. So just a 3-turn water knot seems to work fine for me. I think for me, knots is everything about confidence, and that's never let me down. So I'm happy to use that. But how about you, Nick?
Same kind of deal. Absolutely. Always on the rivers, for pretty much all of your fishing, knotless tapered leaders. And yes, between, like you say, kind of, it's going to depend a lot on again, I've mentioned it a couple of times already, other questions, what your conditions are like. So if it's windy, I'm going to come back and be, shorter leader. And there might be times that you're down as little as 9 or 10 feet in those situations, but then the water's probably ruffled and the presentation side of things becomes not important, but obviously because of the ruffled water and conditions, the fish are not going to pick up your presence so much. But certainly, yeah, in the majority of situations, just like yourself, longer than that, sort of 12 to 14 feet, which is, I find, almost all the time with people that I've taken out, people that come into the shop and so on. You start talking about those kinds of lengths, and they do seem afraid of them, and they're kind of quite happy with the stock. Stick a 9-foot knotless tapered leader on and tie a fly on the end of that. And whilst it is possible to catch fish like that, I think it is amazing how by upping it a few feet, I personally honestly believe you'll catch a few more. And like yourself, I don't think you have to go ridiculously long. The longest leader I ever used with somebody was 18 feet, and that was with a particularly stubborn grayling later in the season that just seemed to be rising and rising, and we covered it with a shorter leader and then a bit longer leader, and we messed around with the flies, and it wouldn't take, and eventually I started again for this guy and said, right, there you go, 12-foot leader, and let's be stupid, and we whacked 6 feet of leader on the end of that, 18-foot leader. Who knows? I mean, it was certainly a fly that fish had seen before, because I said to him, let's have a go, just to see. And that fish popped up and took straight away. And it just, that made me think to myself, was that fish just picking us up? Did it know, that it was kind of being fished for? Who knows? At the end of the day, it's down to confidence. But I would certainly not say that that's the only occasion that I've ever had to do that. Otherwise, we're, like you say, probably a maximum of 14 feet most of the time.
Yeah. And like you say, tapered leader, casting's transference of energy, something that starts thick and gets thinner transfers that energy a whole lot more efficiently. So, Steve, thank you so much for that. The last question is from Barry. I sense I might know who this is, but I'm not 100% sure. Pete, do you carry a lot of flies, and is there anything that winds you up in fly fishing? Over to you.
Barry, is there any... do I carry a lot of flies? Far too many. Far too many. Over the years, I've tried to sort of rein myself back a little bit. I've definitely now, especially I'd say on the reservoir fishing, although I've got masses and masses of them that I hold in my kind of bigger boxes that I take out on the boats with, far too many fly lines and far too much of everything. I will certainly think about, for example, if I was going to Wimbledon, what am I actually going to need? And then sort of cut those down to probably half a dozen patterns, couple of lures, a dry, some nymphs, and away you go. And I find that comes a little bit from the old competition fishing side of things, and trying to sort of make things easier. And certainly, I'm not sure if you would have been the same, Pete. I'm sure you would have done. Guiding wise, over time, you're there. People are paying you. You've got to look after them, and you need to make quick and rapid choices. And so, what I would tend to do is, once I started to find a pattern that worked really well, let's be simple. A black clink hammer. I mean, my box would be rammed full of black clink hammers or TG emergers, something like that. Just simply because I know it's a fly that's going to be used a lot. And I also, I think I have times where, I become real sort of a fly. There's a certain fly that I have a fad about and just use all the time anyway. The TG Emerge is a great example of that. And I've never really got bored of it around here. It's like a kind of a clink hammer, come buzzer, come all sorts, all mixed together. It works brilliantly. So, yes, I love my flies. I'm not a fanatical tyer. I used to be when I was a kid. I used to tie pretty much every day, and I'd like to see new things come along. But once I've found something that works, I'll tend to stick with it, and have little variants are important. Certainly going on to sort of the reservoir side of things, those variants, slightly different colours and so forth. Even in your lures, the infamous blob and so on. There are certain colours and combinations that seem to, light the fish up. So I might end up having, 24 of one pattern, for example, and then different sizes and so forth. But I think certainly opening my boxes, sometimes people would look at them and kind of go, well, there's a lot of flies in there, but not that many patterns, and I I don't know if that's always, perhaps that limits me somewhat. I don't know, but I just find I keep it simple. I think that works for me.
Cool. I'm exactly the same. I carry one nymph box and one dry box, and that's it now. And I have, as long as I've got all of the species of the flies covered, then I'm pretty happy. And then if I've got olives in a variety of sizes, if I've got some caddis in a variety of sizes, very often it will be, if you've identified the hatch, it's probably, if you're not catching on the first one, it's probably a smaller fly that you need. Not always, but very often. And so if I've got those, I've got midges covered in a variety of sizes as well, so they can work. So I've got everything. And then I've got terrestrials, mayfly patterns, and then sort of patterns, sort of bring them up, bigger style patterns. It might be Royal Coachman Parachute, which is a fly that I like very much using, and that may be if I just want to fish a dry fly and try and bring a fish up, but yeah, not big numbers of fish. And then even with the nymphs as well, it's been going back, really, I've just been fishing and trying variants of pheasant tail nymphs. So I will tie them, and I've not tied one fly during lockdown, I have to say, but I will tie those with, it may have a partridge hackle on, it may have a different coloured thorax, it may have a different rib on, it may have a different bead colour. So I've got a variety within that, and then just play with those. So yeah, not great numbers that I've actually needed. And even with my salmon, I've gone back to, in big water, I'll fish an intruder pattern, and then in normal water, I'm just fishing classic spay patterns and mainly Lady Caroline. And I may catch fewer fish, I don't know, but I'm enjoying it, and that's fine. What winds you up in fishing? Not a great deal, actually. I think it's more about than just the fish. And I had a lovely example. I took a friend fishing the other day who hadn't been in a very long while. And it was lovely seeing him see the river for the first time and actually get quite emotional about it. And I wrote this somewhere else, and he actually caught a really big fish. And I said, "Oh, would you like a photo?" And while we were lining it up, it just wriggled free. And he, instead of grabbing hold of it, he just let it go. And at the end of it, I said, "Dude, I'm really sorry I didn't get a photo." He said, "It doesn't matter. You and I saw it." And I thought that was really cool, actually. And that's really resonated with me a fair bit. And so I'm sort of kind of thinking about those things a little bit. The only other thing really is grayling and not holding the dorsal fin up. That's the only thing for me. And seeing some of the pictures since we've been back fishing as well have been awesome, seeing how people are photographing. And as I always say with fly culture, we don't have grip and grim photos in there. And it's been fascinating seeing how people are photographing fish since they've got back fishing. But I don't know if you dodged the bullet there, Nick, or wanted to say anything that wound you up as well. You didn't mention it on the last bit, so I'll give you the chance if you want to.
I know we're talking flies, weren't we? What I mean, there's always stuff, isn't there, that kind of might niggle one another. I think the thing with fly fishing is it's incredibly diverse, and we all have our own opinions and so forth. I must admit the grayling fin thing is something I've done it with people. We've put the fins up and displayed them, and it is an education since kind of hearing people like yourself and looking at grayling shots. I've not I've taken plenty of shots where we haven't had the fin displayed. It's actually educated me a little bit and made me think, actually, no, you don't need the fin up. And actually, I remember taking a picture of a grayling on my own a couple of years ago now against a rod actually in the water, because I was on my own, and I just, it was about the fish anyway. It's not about me. It was about the fish. It was just this thing was stunning, and I just lined it up quickly with the rod in the water. It could have swum off, and I was just lucky it stayed there, and it had its fin sort of up anyway. So and actually got a couple of shots, and off it went. Definitely, though, moving on from that, yeah, there's no excuse for poor fish handling. And when you do see some of these fish, it depends what's being done with it. Look, I have no problem at all if somebody is out reservoir fishing where fish are stocked, They are. I can remember reading articles a long time back, almost where some sort of contributors to magazines almost seem to be trying to sort of justify, the fact that we would go out, catch trout, take them home for the pot. And I remember the saying being used, or the term, they are a stock to be harvested. And actually, if somebody wants to take a fish home, when there's a big outcry of, oh no, that should have gone back, etc., I wouldn't be so happy if it was a wild fish, of course, and there are ways of obviously holding them where you can, the whole keep them wet thing. It's very easy to actually end up getting, if you want a shot of yourself, we do like that. It's always a great memento to have a shot of you with a particularly special fish or whatever, but it doesn't have to be out of the water for very long, if at all. And it certainly should all be taking place over the water, not over the bank. If you drop that fish, it squirms. And with the best windler in the world, you can have handled thousands and thousands of fish. If it squirms free and drops itself on the ground, then that's pretty much a dead fish. And I think the EA, I don't know if you saw it, Pete. There was a thing, wasn't there, a year or two ago now, where they basically put out like timings, didn't they? Like, if you have the fish out for 10 seconds, it's got this amount of chance of survival. If it's out for 30 seconds, it's this, and so forth. So yeah, just, if you're releasing fish, by all means get a photograph, but make it snappy.
That's a good point. And they're not a prop, are they?
No.
They're not
a prop.
And and it's been really encouraging seeing the photographs that are out there and how people are photographing them, and that's been really cool to see. But let's move on now, and thank you, Barry, for that one. That was great. And again, looking ahead, if anyone is interested in sending some questions and would like some answers or help or advice or whatever, just you can contact me via the Fly Culture website, flyculturemag.com, and I'll be very happy to help in any way I possibly can. But we're going to get on to the main event now, and I'm going to learn a little bit more about stillwater angling. And as we said when we talked at the beginning, that we talked about Wimberble, which is based in Somerset. It's a reservoir. I know it a little bit, and I've guided on it a few times for Nick in the past. I would describe it as a really good place to learn about reservoir fishing, in the sense that it's not a huge, great expanse of water, but it's big enough to be interesting. And I thought we could use that as an example for approaching stillwater fishing. So, Nick, how big is Wimberble? How many acres? 400 odd or something?
It's I think it's about 380, 485. It's just over 380 acres.
Brilliant. So that's an interesting size, isn't it?
Really interesting, because it's obviously, it's obviously not a small water. It's vastly larger than a lot of places that, if people have been used to fishing there, Diva Springs, or more locally, Blakewell, Bellbrook, etc. Places like that. Even somewhere like, say, I'm thinking like Bushy Lees, which is kind of like it's almost bordering on a small reservoir. It's
about 30 acres, isn't
it? Yeah, Bushy Lees, I might even be a little bigger than that, but it's certainly, for somebody, let's say, so I'm sort of, my thought process here is, if somebody turned up from, one of those put and take few acre small waters on the banks of the reservoir like Wimberble, which, to put it into perspective, Rutland's over, I think it's 3,500, isn't it? It's only over 3,000. So you're looking at fitting Wimberble like 10 times into that lake. It's unbelievable, really. If you turned up there and you not really sure how to approach a large water, you could get into trouble pretty quickly, I think, in terms of actually having an enjoyable day. You could go for a very long time, and I know yourself, innovators have been always the people that, for me, have kind of, I've looked up to. So, your Gordon Frasers of Mastering Nymph and Arthur Cove, My Waves with Trout, and all of those. You imagine what it was like for them. They didn't have, anything really to go on, and suddenly they were fishing waters like Rutland, which must have just seemed like a sea. It must have been just like an inland ocean, and you've got to try and work out where the fish are and how to target them. But there are ways and there are tricks and bits and pieces which, if I can help now, we'll
Well, let's go on to
analyze
that.
it.
I'm gonna assume that anyone listening knows about stillwater fishing. They know about reservoirs, and we were going to talk about rods and things like that. But let's assume it's going to be a 9.5 foot 7 weight, 10 foot 7 weight, 8 weight, along those sorts of lines. The lines, I guess, you're going to have a variety from all the sinking densities, intermediates, midge tips, for those sorts of things. What I would like to do is try and get into your head and say, right, you've never seen Wimbledon before. You've heard it's hot at the moment. You want to give it a try. You've rocked up there, for example, but it could be anywhere. We're just using that because you know it so well as well. But what would be the first things that you are thinking about when you're looking at that water for the first time?
So I check the weather conditions, obviously. All right. So we know it's going to be hot. I'd definitely be thinking about the wind, what the wind direction is going to be like. So, for example, therefore, then, if you're a right-handed caster, you're not necessarily, unless you're good at reverse casting, you're not necessarily going to, want to go straight to a bank where the wind is hitting your casting shoulder. So it's worth having a little look at the wind and thinking about where the wind direction is going to be. That's important. I would also say if you're hitting somewhere like Wimbledon for the first time, you've got experience, like you say, already from all your other reservoirs, but you've never been there. You've checked your wind. Next thing I'd be thinking is you want to have a long day of it. You really do. Are we talking this time of year now, just sort of hot weather? Yes. So
it's just general. Yeah, let's say, we're allowed to go fishing again. So yeah, you wanted to go.
So
yeah, let's do that.
I would definitely. I mean, I expect there's a lot of people out there that want to do a long session anyway, but certainly, I wouldn't advise, if you know that it's going to be clear blue skies and bright sun, doesn't necessarily mean don't go fishing by any stretch of the imagination. You can have some very good sport up there, even in those conditions. But I would be looking to get up there early doors, literally crack of dawn if you possibly can. And you could, if you really, really are keen, there's a method then that I have done myself whereby you go fishing dead early, so crack of dawn, you pick up those first few hours when the fish are in closer, they're feeding in shallow, they're generally really happy, and you can have a lot of fun with nymphs, dries, etc. And you'll watch that as each hour goes on, you turn up there and start fishing, you're allowed to be there as soon as the sun's up. So say you're there at 5 o'clock as an example. You'll very often see that the fishing between sort of 5 and 7 can be electric, really, really good. And then as each hour goes on, and certainly by sort of 9 o'clock, it starts to peter out, and sometimes just becomes that you'd almost, if you rocked up there at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you'd actually think, well, there's just no fish here at the moment. And there's a good chance that actually, other than a few stragglers, a hell of a lot of them have actually pushed off out into the deeper water, which is, so my next plan of attack there is, where possible, is if you've got a boat booked, you can go and do your early morning session and have a bit of fun there, and then get a little bit of a break, and then jump on a boat, and now you can just cover a lot more water, and you can get out to the depths where those fish might be. I have seen that where you've been there, say mid-morning, and the boats are actually catching reasonably well, and the bank's gone quiet at this time of year. So it's all relative. It's all, fishing's a very seasonal thing. But yeah, I'd get on a new venue, get a nice long good go at it, because somewhere like Wimbleby, even though it is a smaller reservoir, if you go up there and you've only got a small amount of time to play with, then you're only going to scratch the surface, really. The other great thing with the boat, of course, although there are very good footpaths around Wimbleby, I've used the boat as very often as just a vessel to get around, so I can zoom down to Calmore or over to sort of the dam end there, and fish around there and back to Bessams and all of that. And especially Calmore, I really like fishing there off the shoreline. So the boat's just a quick and easy way to get there.
Interesting. And when coming back to your morning session, what is your approach there? I know it depends, and this is a really difficult one to answer because conditions could be different all the time. But that early morning session, will that be a floating line session?
I'm very much hunting dry fly feeders. And even though I often know that in those circumstances, if you chucked out some nymphs and, as we say, twiddled them back, nice, easy, simple, the most simple fishing there is, especially if there's I'm a right-hander. I do all this reverse casting luck as well. But if you're just, going out for some nice, simple fishing, wind on my left shoulder, nice bit of drift, throw some little nymphs out. At this time of year and at that time of day, they're probably going to be sort of very light sort of cruncher patterns, that type of thing, not necessarily heavy buzzers. A lot of people think straight away, oh, I'm nymphing and I've got wind drift. Well, I'll just stick a nice heavy buzzer on, and that'll catch me. But actually, you'll go below the fish in that situation. So, I'm very much out with a simple fly like a black hopper, with a Wimbleby being an upland reservoir high up on the national park. A huge amount of their food that they target is terrestrial. They are, at the moment, they will be feeding on cockabondu beetles, and it's obviously the hawthorn flies and all of that kind of stuff. They're very opportune. Snails, anything like that. So you can't really go wrong with a hopper, or even look up things like Chris Ogborn used to love his snot fly, which is just a big old ball of seal's fur, really, black seal's fur. Something with a good silhouette. And the great thing with Wimbleby is it's such a clear water fishery throughout the year, and you get very, very few problems there, if ever, with any algae, that you can chuck the dry out, and as long as you stay sort of relatively in touch with it, you can leave it there quite a long time. And I truly believe some of these fish will come from great depths. There are places on Wimbleby you could be fishing off the shoreline into 15, 20 foot very quickly. And those fish, even if they are actually quite deep, will very often come all the way up and smack one of those. But of course, what I'm really looking for early morning is a fish that's cruising around. Just, we know, don't we, that all sorts of fish, not just trout, but they love those light changes. There's something that seems to switch them on. Sea trout do it, salmon do it, bass do it. Definitely early mornings and late evenings can be a great time to be there. And first point of call is dries, definitely. And then,
do you carry another rod with you though? Will you have a rod with? Do you have two set up? And will you carry one? And when you are fishing, are you covering water? Are you speculating water, or are you looking for that rise? Are you covering a lot of ground in your search for those fish?
There's a lot of questions in there that are, So no, it is. Depends on my mood, really. Yes, if I'm really sort of determined, right, I'm going to go out and catch a few fish today, definitely dry fly setup, nymph setup for that sort of time of day, and I can chop and change quickly. But actually, sometimes I'll just like to, I just don't want the clutter. I want to be able to move. That's really important on a reservoir. Is that there are areas there on Wimbleby we're using as an example that are real hotspots, but if they're not really working, you got to be able to move quickly. And sometimes, the whole thought of pick another rod up, I don't really like having to carry bags around. I very rarely, if I don't have to myself, I might do if I've got somebody I'm guiding, just simply because I'm carrying extra bits and pieces. But where possible, I want it all in a backpack, and I want to be able to move The only thing that I do carry very often is a long-handled net, just because often I get up to some fairly long leaders. And although I've tried it, with your pan net styles that we use on the rivers, I just like that extra length of the net, and I think it's better for the fish. And you can also stab the pole in the ground and use the net as a line tray to stop your line drifting away from you. So yeah, it depends. Definitely, there's a lot to be said for having your dry setup and your nymph setup, and even moving on further from that. It might well be that you think they could be in those first few feet, so you might have a floater on one and an intermediate on the other. Conditions are going to dictate that, really.
Interesting. One of the things I was going to say, so I don't wade straight out, so as deep as I can get, and throw the line out as far as I possibly can. That's probably not a smart policy, is it?
You're dead on that. You just don't want to wade straight in. Absolutely not. One of the best fish that I ever caught in super shallow water at exactly that time of day was a good long time ago now, but I'll never forget it so long as I live. I was fishing with a really good old friend of mine, Phil Prideaux, who's a bit like a grandfather to me, and we were out on you know it well, Roadford. And I was fishing around in the shop inlet area, and we arrived absolutely perfect summer's morning, very, very early. I remember it well because there were a couple of hot air balloons rising up, and I'd gone out hoping that I was going to find one of these decent sized browns right in the margins, and I did. This fish would have been no more than a foot off the shoreline, absolutely no more than a foot. Its back and its fins were out as it just wandered its way along, not a care in the world, just sipping here and there. And I popped a little bob spit, size 14 bob spits in front of him by about a couple of feet. I was right down low. I reckon, well, like I said, the fish was no more than a foot or so off. I was way up the bank with basically my leader, crossing dry land and the fly just there waiting for him. And when he took it, as you can imagine, in such shallow water, he went absolutely hell for leather. So I reckon those people up on the balloons probably heard my yelp, when it took off. Yeah. And there was a bit of whipping, and I had to run down to the bank, to keep it under control and play it. But yeah, if I just waded in, that fish would have been long gone. I probably we've all done it. I've made the mistake. I think I learned that lesson the hard way in a previous trip where I'd spooked the fish by just walking straight up to the bank. I actually wasn't going to wade in, but I just walked up to the bank to fish and, spooked a decent fish from the side. And that made me think, wait a minute, So, yeah, I mean, early doors in the morning, those fish can be right in. It can be really exciting. It's kind of like river fishing, but you're on a reservoir. You're looking for risers and actively targeting them. And actually, one of the questions that we covered earlier on, you could actually fish a really light line. Then that would be a good time to do it.
Mm-hmm. So you'll fish that way. You're one of the things. Let's say you're not finding rising fish and you're going to fish, like you say, a light cruncher, for example. How are you manipulating that in the water? How often are you varying the retrieve, the speed? What sorts of things? Have you got any tips for people about retrieving and bringing their flies to life and thinking about the depth they're fishing as well? I guess if you're fishing, let's start in with that floating line. How are you thinking about that manipulation of the fly?
Experimenting all the time, a little bit, to see what's going to work. But ultimately, the number one thing is that I would say, I've certainly learned over the years and tried to show people that so often you don't have to do very much. Let's take that left to right wind again. You can throw your flies out, maybe slightly upwind, certainly across it. And then if you can just maintain some kind of contact with the line, now and again, perhaps put the odd, big, long, slow pull in just to kind of lift your flies in the water. This is if you're thinking that the fish are quite, shallow at this point and up in the water. So just what you're thinking about is those flies drifting with the water, very much like the naturals do. If you watch, buzzers as a very good example, where they might wriggle vigorously and then drop back a long way, back through the levels, and then go again as they try to get to the surface. They are really very much at the mercy of the current. They're certainly, they're not swimming upwind. They're trying to basically get to the surface and get hatched. And depending on warmth and so forth and time of the day, they might be making their way and hanging a little bit, and then they're really at the mercy of the fish, and then going again. And therefore, you've got to mimic that, and that doesn't mean necessarily just throw it out and figure of eight it all the way straight back in very quickly, because you could be pulling your flies maybe too far in the water. You very much as well, you're bringing your flies back to you perhaps so quickly that the fish aren't getting enough time to see them. I definitely see that. When I've fished up there and I'm doing okay, I don't think it's anything to do with length of cast or anything. It's very often actually that your flies are just staying in the water that much longer. So, but get to know the figure of eight and play around with it. Experiment with everything from absolutely uber slow. I even go down to sort of like trying to do like a 2-finger figure of eight, or 3-finger if I think I'm going a bit too quickly. Sometimes just hang on and wait for that lock up take, but don't be afraid to. There will be days where you'll find where if you suddenly speed up, the fish will hit it. And it's a lot of this stuff's dead simple, and a lot of this stuff people, I'm sure, listening have heard it all, quite often, but I do wonder sometimes how often people do actually do it. It's very easy to get into, almost stuck into a rut where you just throw it out, figure of eight it in, throw it out, figure of eight it in. And especially if the fishing's hard, actually that's a really good time to just be experimenting and playing around and trying to find what's going to work on the day. And you might just happen on the technique.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the 2 or 3-finger figure of eight I'd never heard of. So that was really interesting to hear about that. And I'm sort of, again, pantomiming it because it makes
just tiny,
really good sense. And they're the subtleties, aren't they, that can make a difference on a day.
And what I would say, sorry, Pete, just one other thing I must mention as well. When you talk retrieves, so often in still water fishing, people are waiting for the whack. Fish is on, obviously, and especially with rainbows, off it goes cartwheeling into the distance. But actually, what's very, very important, and you can do this really well on a summer's morning when it's a very good time to practice when the water's calm. Figure of eight super slowly, uber slowly. Let the wind, what little current there is. There's always some kind of current there. Do it, but watch your line, because so often you'll just suddenly see the line like an elastic band start to tighten up, or the loop of line just off the tip of your rod just flicks up, moves a little bit, and those are my favorite fish. You just lift into it, and it's kind of, you really feel like you've caught that fish. Then not that it just hung itself, as it were.
Something you said there as well, and it's interesting because it's the tips I think I really want to focus in with your experience and everything else. And you mentioned flies, which I assume to be 2 or 3 flies. What sort of, people, from what I know about it, people always worry about tangles and stuff like that. What sort of leader length are you using? And having spoken about tapered leaders, I don't know whether you're using those or not, but also what sort of dropper lengths are you using? And what advice can you give people wanting to improve their fishing so that perhaps they don't get so many tangles? Or what tips can you give people about fishing droppers and those extra flies?
Yeah, okay. It is all about, first of all, definitely the casting side of things. You knew I was going to say that. The thing is that you can tangle up a leader with one fly on it if your cast isn't working. So it's worth having a little look at the cast. And actually, this is a time where if you're fishing a reasonably long leader, I'll come on to the length in a sec. If you're fishing a reasonably long leader with droppers, this isn't the time to be trying to practice your tightest loops. We're used to doing that where we've got a long leader and one fly, and we're trying to get it in under a tree on a stream. We need that tight loop, that high line speed. But open your loop up, definitely. Try and work out ways of doing that with your cast, and then I would feel totally naked with anything less than 2 flies when I'm out. You've got to think about a reservoir and the fact that, if you're suddenly jumping, and I wouldn't recommend going from a very small reservoir to a big reservoir, a very small water straight to a big reservoir. I'd sort of look for a medium-sized one and then a bit bigger and so forth. But yes, in terms of flies, you definitely really need 2 on, because you've got to try and cover depths where possible. And even if you're fishing dry flies, the simple fact is you've got so much water to cover that 2 flies is better than 1, and 3 flies is a hell of a lot better than 2. So I would certainly say try not to be too scared about using droppers. Practice with them until you get better at using them without too many tangles. My droppers are long. Most of the time I'm fishing between sort of 8 and 10 inches. I like that fly to be quite a long way away. I don't, little short stubby 4-inch droppers just don't do it for me, partly because I will play around with flies a bit as well. And so if I've got a 4-inch dropper, by the time I've tied on a couple of flies, then I'm going to be retying the entire leader. But it is very much, I certainly wouldn't go and put on my standard sort of shoreline leaders 15 feet. As a very basic standard leader, 5 foot to the first fly, 5 to the second, 5 to the point fly. And you definitely don't want to go and take that lot and start chucking it straight into the wind. Get the wind on your back, get it on if you're a right-hander, left to right shoulder, or left-hander, right to left shoulder. Try and use the elements to help you a little bit. Don't try and go for huge long distance casts, especially if you've turned up there early morning. There's a damn good chance that a lot of those fish are quite close in, and very early season those fish are quite close in. It's much better to do a short cast well, than a long cast badly, and turn that leader over with your 2 flies, or if you can face it, 3 flies. I fish, off boats, I fish 4 a lot. Because it gives me so many dimensions. I can fish a couple of lures, a couple of nymphs. I can fish them close together, so I could have, for example, if I had going up to like a 20-foot leader, I might have a couple of flies quite close to the fly line, so they're higher in the water, and then quite a long distance, and then a couple a lot further away. There's loads of things you can do. It's very diverse. But if for somebody starting off, I'd say 7 foot to the first fly, 7 foot to the second fly, and don't be afraid to use 8 to 10 inches. Open your loop up and give it a go. I personally don't taper them very much, because most of the time on a reservoir you're going to have some kind of wind there. You're going to have your left to right or off your back, and it's going to give you some assistance, and it's going to help puff that line out. And the very nature of having a wider loop, you've almost created a sail in the line anyway. The time that I would be fishing knotless tapereds is when I am trying to turn over, dry flies, a couple of them perhaps, and it is very still conditions, and getting those flies well away from the fly line is imperative. So a bit like our rivers then. But for most of the time, my reservoir leader is going to be 8 to even 10-pound breaking strain, because some of those fish hit hard, and modern fluorocarbons, the diameters on them are so low that you don't really need to go lighter than that. I do go down to sort of 6 and so on, but my standard leaders would be 8 and 10 pounds. Fishing nymphs and lures and that. Dryers I might drop back a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
And we've talked more about the imitative side of things. Let's go on to lures and fishing those, and a couple of things on that front. If you've any advice of setups of lures, and it seems to me that you carry a variety of different lines, densities coming to sinking lines. How often are you thinking about changing those as you're fishing? Is that something you'll either start higher in the water, immediately go lower, or work your way through the columns? How does that work? And then what advice would you give somebody as a setup of patterns for fishing from a boat on sinking line tactics?
Okay. That's a hell of a question as well, because obviously fishing reservoirs. Wimbleball has got a really great range of depths. A huge amount of it's very deep, very quickly off the shoreline. But there are places also, Bessems is quite a good example of a bank there, where it can be quite shallow for quite a long way out. So in terms of your lines, I'm certainly going to be carrying as an absolute minimum my floater. Then I'm going to probably have something like a midge tip. I'm also going to have a couple of intermediates, a slow intermediate and a faster intermediate. And then you get into your what's commonly sort of seen, on the scene. There's all this sort of the talk about die lines, and really and truthfully, very simply, a die 3 is a line that sinks at 3 inches per second, a die 5 inches per second, and a die 7 inches. I'd be carrying a full range of those and then some, because all the different manufacturers have different sink rates. There's different the way that they actually present in the water, can be very different as well. So you have all your sweep lines and so forth. But I'm sure now, if somebody's new to reservoirs, they're going, whoa, hands up. Wait a minute. To start with on a reservoir, I would say your floater, intermediate, whatever you fancy, and a medium and a fast sinker. 4 lines. That's what you need to kind of get going with, because you are definitely going to have situations where you need to, get down to your fish, and you're definitely going to have situations where they're in mid water as well. So, to head out to a reservoir with anything but those, I think would be a bit of a mistake. But again, if you're a beginner, I always sort of said, you've got to sort of cut your teeth a little bit, perhaps on that smaller water. A great way to treat a reservoir is turn up and cut it into pieces of cake, a bit like those small waters, So rather than trying to fish the whole thing, it's like, okay, I'm going to treat that bit as a small water, and then start thinking about the depths. If it's got a steep bank, odds on it's deep water pretty quickly. So bank fishing there. If it's cold weather, there's a good chance that they're down, if it's early season. And so you're going to be onto your sinking lines. The warmer the weather, the more fly life is around, the telltale signs of rising fish and so forth, the further up we might come, So generally speaking, to try and, again, I've said to beginners, your floater, your intermediate, your medium sinker, your fast sinker, I would say earlier season, I'd start deep and work my way up. And later season, I'd go the other way. I'd start higher up and go down. But taking that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, again, it will come massively down to conditions. And, the grapevine's great. The one thing now that social media is so good for is you can so often, find out from people, where they've caught the fish and what flies are working and what areas and so forth, So you can make a pretty good guess. If I was heading to Wimbleball, in the next sort of few weeks or so, as it gets hotter and hotter, the chances are I would be starting deep first of all. If I was out on a boat, I'd be down, and certainly if it was later in the day, I'd be going down. But there's the only way of doing it really is to experiment a little bit, and so that will mean that let's say we've started deep. If you fished with a 7 inch per second off the shoreline, I very rarely have to go that deep. So I'd probably be on my 5. I'd get a lot of the depths that I want to get to on Wimbleball with my die 5, and I'd give it a good chance. I'd go to likely fishing areas, good areas, and I'd I'd be fishing that line for a good sort of, hour or so in different places, and, trying with different techniques and so on. And if that's not working, I might start to think, are they up in the water a little bit? If I'd been retrieving that line in and I've had some takes later on, and certainly as that fly line and the lines coming up in the water, if I'm starting to get takes later on in the retrieve, I might start thinking, well, maybe these fish are up, So then I might go to the dive 3, or I might put an intermediate on or something, So you're always looking and feeling for the telltale signs.
Great.
What I would say is, bad days for me are where I'm constantly changing lines. Any competitions I've ever fished, I've not done. I'm not. I've fished competitions and I've done okay here and there, but I'm not. I'm certainly not like some people that go out there and they win huge amounts of matches. And I know actually that the way they've done that is, they practice hard, they get to know their venue, and actually if they need to make a change, it will be calculated. And it will be quick. And most of the time, if you speak to a lot of people that do well on those comps, and you speak to them about a particular day, they've hardly changed. Not always the case, but very often they've got the lines in their head and they're fishing with them. If you're out there with your sinking lines, chopping and changing all day long, actually it's a bit like your leaders and all of that. You're spending so much time doing that you're not actually fishing. And that's another reason not to go and load your tackle bag when you're a beginner with too many, because they'll just confuse you completely, and actually you'll probably end up having a not very enjoyable time out there, and maybe kind of giving up, which is not obviously the reason we go. So yeah.
And give us, this is another fastball, and I apologise for these. I'm trying to think of some questions that people might ask you if they got the chance to. And so you're searching the water, you've got your dive 5 on. What are the 3 flies and I know conditions dictate different things, but say a standard sort of day, you're fishing Bessons, you've got 3 flies on, you've got your dive 5. What would those 3 flies be?
If I was fishing 3 flies on a dive 5, I would almost certainly have a blob on there somewhere. Oh, there's going to be people cringing at that, which is good. But then lots of people out there that fish reservoirs know how devastating that is as a fly. But the reason that a lot of the time, if I'm fishing that blob, it will be on the point fly position. There's various colors that I favor. But I'll have that in the point fly position to help control my depth. By their very nature, they don't descend as quickly as, say, for example, a big black buzzer, which is going to, cut through the water really quickly and get deep. So I'll use that as a little bit of depth control. And if I may, I might sometimes have that as a booby, so I'll have buoyant eyes to keep me up in the water even more. Without doubt, Pete, I'm going to sort of, not waffle too much here, blob on the point, and I'd have a couple of nymphs. It'd probably be, again, crunchers. On Wimbleball, I favour black crunchers. Muskins, very like a cruncher as well. People can go and look these up. Some people will know what these are straight away, but crunchers, muskins. Sometimes I might fish what we call pulling hoppers, which are basically, for those that don't know what a hopper is, it's basically like a very small daddy long legs. It's got all the legs pointing out back. It's got the well picked out seal's first sort of body. It might have a sort of a pearly rib, and a decent sort of hackle. On the pulling ones will often have a hen hackle, so it's soft, but yeah, it will really simple stuff. That lure on the point, and then a couple of nymphs, and fish them very much sort of washing line style, really. This is the thing on a sinking line. I'm not just throwing it out there. I'll throw it out, I'll count it down. I will having hit the water, I'll pull it straight as well. I'll make sure I give it a couple of good yanks to make sure I'm in touch with the flies properly, and then I'll figure eight it uber slowly as it sinks, and I'll count it down, and then I'll begin whatever retrieve. And sometimes that retrieve is going to be slow. If I want to keep it deep, I'm going to fish it slow, and then kind of work out if I'm fishing it really slow and I start snagging up, then I'll count it down a little bit less, and try and really work out where my flies are in relation to the lake bed and where the fish are, and what you're trying to find is the taking zone. So on a red letter day, you've chucked your die 5 out, you've been messing around for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, with retrieves and so on, and then all of a sudden at 15 seconds down, you start to realize you're getting takes and fish, and and very often those sort of that mixture of sort of lures and nymphs. In an ideal world, we said 3 flies. In an ideal world, I'd be fishing 4, and then I can fish a couple of lures and a couple of nymphs. And I can use the reason that I've often got those lures on. You don't have to do this all the time. You could catch them on nymphs, but the reason it works so well is that fish are drawn into those lures. Rainbow trout, which we're catching a lot of, obviously, on places like Wimblewell, are such an inquisitive fish. They will come in and look at that stuff, and they don't necessarily take that. They see the nymph and grab hold of it. If you're going targeting browns up there, there's an increasing number of wild browns being caught up there that are getting big on the rud. Then you might be going differently. My approach for them so often is just leech patterns on an intermediate, nothing very like I'd approach Colliford, nothing, again, too complicated, really.
Nice.
But yeah,
nice.
if I had to pick a few flies, blob and a couple of nymphs and away you go.
Nice. And I know these questions are really difficult because we're sort of trying to talk generically, yet a day on the water isn't like that. So thank you for answering those. I think, a lot of these, I've got a long list of things, and you've almost pretty much answered a lot of it. What would be your top tip for somebody? What is there something that I've not covered that you think would be really useful for somebody listening to this to walk away with and think, and there's been lots already, but what would you think that you would like to add to some of the stuff that we've talked about already that would add value to their fishing on a reservoir?
On a reservoir, definitely where possible, I would say now is a really, really good time. Obviously, as it gets warmer and warmer, people start thinking that, reservoirs, it's true, can get more and more difficult because the water's warming and the fish go deeper and there's less oxygen and they get lethargic. But there's a really important thing. We're seeing it at Wimblewell right now. Because the water's reducing, it's uncovering what's underneath the water. And the same as if I went and approached a bass mark for the first time, where I'd go at low water and look at what's there. If you can possibly go, even if you know at the moment that perhaps, as it gets warmer, it's not the best conditions, go to your reservoir that you want to target and have a good look at it in low water, because what you can then do is even take pictures. You can obviously jump on your Google Maps and look at the satellite thing and get an idea from there as well. But by actually physically going and looking at it, you determine what's under the water, what the features are, old hedgerows, your lanes, your feeder streams, silt beds as well. There will be things that if you turned up there early season and it's full to the brim, a site that I absolutely love, we all love that early season. But if you turned up there to begin with, you don't necessarily, without looking at the bank and so on, you don't necessarily straight away understand what lurks beneath. But go and have a good look around now. When it's low water, when it's hot, weather conditions. Yeah, top tip would be, try and find out what the features are, because that is invaluable information at a later stage. Even if you're out on a boat, these reservoirs can drop 20 feet, 30 feet. The water can be way, way down, and you might suddenly go, crikey, there's a beautiful pinnacle. So too far to reach, normally speaking, when the waters full to the brim and I'm fishing from the bank. But if I was out on a boat and I set a drift up to cross that pinnacle, a nice little drop off, you got a great fish holding area. So get out there and have a little look now, and you'll learn a lot more about what lies beneath your reservoir.
It's really interesting, and it brings it nicely full circle from one of the questions that we had primarily about river fishing is observation, isn't it? And be observant, be aware of what's happening. Don't be afraid to change, I guess, is the thing as well, isn't it? If something's not working, ring the changes and do things a little bit differently. And from the experience I've had, that people will often spend longer on something and stick with it, which sometimes it comes right, I know, but sometimes it pays to make those. And I know, coming from the background of being a guide myself and obviously yourself, that you will make those and ring those changes a lot more quickly. And that's things I've always tried to get people to think about. Right, if it doesn't feel right or nothing's happening, change. Don't stick with it, change.
Yep.
And sometimes it's right, not always, but it's good to do that, isn't it? And make those changes and ring those changes sooner.
It is, and you've made something twig in my mind there really quickly as well. Kind of on the tip side of things is, change is important, but so often, that little rig I said there, stick a blob on the point, or if you can't face that, use a cormorant or something like that, and your nymphs. But so many people, when I first sort of start them off on sinking lines, they're a bit scared of them, because it's that kind of thing that, they can see the floating line, they've got more of an understanding of the control, etc., that they need. But actually, you can take all the same flies, your blob and your couple of crunchers, and what I tend to do is, if I need to make a quick change, just wind my fly line in and my leader all the way through the rod, let's make a simple change. We just change to an intermediate to begin with. You rig your intermediate up, you quickly thread your line through your ring, your first or couple of rings or so, tie it back onto that leader. So what I'm saying is, what you don't want to do on a reservoir is spend all your time going, oh, that fly hasn't worked. Anytime anybody says to me, I've been through everything in the box, that, to me, then that means they're spending more time trying to decide on things and probably aren't fishing very confidently. Oh, that's not worked. If you get into the habit of, I've used that on the floating line, it hasn't caught me anything yet, but is it because the flies are wrong? I bet in many, many situations, unless you're just fishing a completely, very, very shallow bit of water or a very featureless bit of water, and that's why you should go and look at it now and try and find out what the features are. So as when it is covered, it gives you a better chance. Rather than doing that, actually think about the depth. If I was going to change something a lot, it would be the depth, coupled with also, if I know that if I've been in an area that I think is reasonably good and I've played around on my depth and nothing's happening at all, either it's a really off day or there's a good chance that there's just no fish in front of me, I'd definitely be fan casting, backwards and forwards and trying to cover water. And if I'm not getting anything, give it, set your clock a bit. And if nothing's happened within an hour, don't stand there and think it'll happen. Move a bit. You don't necessarily. I've sometimes moved 20, 30 meters and started catching fish. Sometimes it can be less than that, but it's a good way of learning the reservoir. But definitely, like you say, I quite agree. Make changes, but not always, not the flies always. Think more about, with reservoirs, I would always be thinking about the depth, the speed of my retrieve, and then the flies, really. That's the kind of order that I'd be working on.
Brilliant, Nick. Thank you so much for this. I know it's not an easy one to cover in such a, as I said before, a wide range. But I think you've done that fantastically well. And I think it's added some value for our listeners that I hope they will get something out of that as well. And it's been kind of fun to cover something I don't know so much about as well. So it's got me thinking about stuff as well. And you mentioned Colliford as well. And, you know, I love that place. And I'm just intermediate line and elite Choritapo. And I just love it when you lock up on those brown trout. I just love that. So that's fantastic. So maybe I'm heading that way before too long. I know you're spending a lot of time in London. Are you guiding at Wimberpool still, or are you doing some of that as well?
If anybody ever wanted me to take them out there, yes, I can do it. I mean, obviously at the moment, the shop in London's not open. So we're sort of just waiting to hear about that. But yeah, I mean, I've been one of the really fortunate people living in this area to have fished Wimberpool since I was about 11 years old. And I love the place. You know, and it was the first place in terms of still waters really that I ever guided. So yeah, of course. Please do give me a shout if anybody wants a hand up there. I'll be more than happy. I've took a few people out last year, and I mean, with going back to Mark's fish. Just everything up there, the clarity. I fished up there with James and Toby Coe last year, and I think they were blown away by clarity and quality of fish and just the scenery. Wildlife is brilliant up there as well. So there's it's more to it than just catching the fish. If people want to get to know the place better, of course, give me a shout.
Fantastic. Mate, thank you so much for putting you on the spot with the questions and the questions for the reservoir stuff as well. So thank you for that. Hopefully we will get to fish before too long. So thanks, Nick, for being your third appearance on here, actually. So thanks for that.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Pete. Always lovely to catch up. I'm honoured to do these. It's great fun to do. I hope I haven't waffled too much. There's a lot of detail with it's something actually I think people start to realise with reservoirs is that there's more to it than meets the eye. But no, thanks again for having me on.
Cool. Thanks, bud. And we'll fish soon as well. So,
I really hope so.
Thank you again. Thank you for everyone for listening. As you found, hopefully you found the question part of it as interesting as Nick talking about reservoir fishing as well. So if you do have any more questions, fire them across to me and I will do my best to answer them. And if not, I will get someone on who will be able to help with that too. Thank you for everyone for ideas for guests as well. And I greatly appreciate those. And everyone who sent them, I always reply to you and say thank you very much indeed as well. So fire those at me if you have any thoughts. I'm really enjoying doing that. We're just putting the summer edition of the magazine to bed now. It's the 3rd of June at the moment. We're just finishing editing that at the moment. This will probably go out the week following this, so about the 7th, something like that, of June. So that will be going to the printers then, and we'll be releasing the summer issue. I'm really, really pleased and proud of how this one looks as well. And we've got some varied and interesting articles for you. So hopefully you'll enjoy that one. You'll see on our social media channels that they will be, when that's coming live, we've chosen a completely different sort of cover for that. And even the autumn one I've chosen now as well, which is completely different again. So I'm really looking forward to showing that to you before too long. Thank you to everyone for listening as well. This is Pete Tigers and this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.